welcome to the Rob Burgess Show. I'm, of course, your host, Rob Burgess. On this, our 49th episode, our guest is Lynn Walsh. Lynn Walsh is an Emmy Award-winning journalist who has been working in investigative journalism at the national level, as well as locally in California, Ohio, Texas, and Florida. Currently, she leads the KNSD investigative team at the NBC TV station in San Diego, California, where she is the Investigative Executive Producer. She is the national president for the Society of Professional Journalists and also serves the journalism organization as a member of SPJ's FOIA and ethics committees. Lynn was also selected to represent SPJ on the Freedom of Information Act Advisory Committee, where she works to recommend changes to help improve the FOIA process. Prior to working in California, she was working as data producer and investigative reporter for the Scripps National Desk, producing stories for the 30-plus Scripps news organizations around the country. Before moving to the National Desk, she worked as the investigative producer at WPTV NewsChannel 5 in West Palm Beach, Florida. She has won state and local awards as well as multiple Emmys for her stories. She loves holding the powerful accountable and spends more time than she would like fighting for access to public information. Her passion lies in telling multimedia stories that deliver hard-hitting facts across multiple platforms. She describes herself as a data viz nerd who is obsessed with new online tools to share information on the web and mobile applications. Lynn is always interested in new projects surrounding FOI, public information access, mobile reporting tools, social media, and interactive journalism. She's a proud Bobcat alumna and graduated from the Ohio University's E.W. Scripps School of Journalism. And now on to the show.
This is Lynn.
Hey, Lynn, it's Rob. How are you?
Hi, good. How are you?
Good. Did you have some time to talk now still?
I did, yes. Oh. Sorry about yesterday. With the travel, it was harder than I thought to get some phone calls off. So.
Oh, no, that's okay. How was the wedding?
It was fun. Yeah, no, it was a lot of fun. It was a friend from college, and it was good to see people again, especially when I don't live where a lot of them are. So.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Just for people that don't know who you are, if you could kind of explain about yourself and your role at the SPJ there real quick here.
Yeah, so my name is Lynn Walsh, and I'm the national president for the Society of Professional Journalists. We are the oldest and one of the largest journalism organizations in the country. We have journalists in our group. We also have members of the public, and we work to protect the First Amendment, freedom of the press, and also push for journalistic ethics.
Right. And how did you yourself get started in journalism? What was your start in that?
So it began in high school for me. I wrote for my high school paper, became editor, and then from there went to college, went to Ohio University where I studied broadcast journalism, and so did a lot of TV and online reporting kind of when MMJing was becoming the new thing. And from there, went into investigative journalism. Specifically, I've worked for an online only nonprofit investigative news group, and then also television stations on their investigative units.
Okay. And the reason that we're talking now, of course, is because the SPJ sent out that press release about, Trump, of course, calling the media, I guess he was referring to some specific ones, but he kind of just meant, in general, it seems like the enemy of the American people. What was your reaction when you first heard that?
Well, to me, one, disappointed, and also, frustrated myself as a journalist. But, from speaking, on behalf of SPJ, for us, we see this as something that the public should be very upset about and should really take a stand against, because even though he may have specifically targeted news organizations in the press, really what journalists do every day is so that the public can get information. And, everyone is going about their daily jobs. I think of someone like my mother who works full-time. She raised 4 kids. There's no way that she had a chance to go to school board meetings or go to a city council meeting or see what's going on. So she did rely on the paper, on the local television stations to inform her and kind of keep her up to date with what's going on, and then also to let her know if something maybe isn't going on or isn't right that is going on, so they can hold them accountable. So I think for us to hear the president, the highest office in this country, and some would argue one of the most powerful people in the world, to be attacking the press, to me, it is attack against the public and our rights in this country and what this country was founded on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree with that for sure. Now, the term fake news, it seems like has kind of gotten weaponized and turned back in on itself. When I think people started using that, it was more about the, things you'd see on Facebook that look like websites that they actually aren't, and, are things that aren't actually true in any way. But the way it's being used now, especially by President Trump, is to kind of just disparage anything that I don't like as fake news. Can you kind of talk about the fake news phenomenon, or how that term should be or used at all, maybe? So.
Yeah, so there's a difference between, fake news and just an opinion or information or something that you maybe don't agree with, right? When a news organization publishes something that maybe is critical of President Trump or his administration, or anyone for that matter, just because that person may not like what it says does not make it fake. And I think that's where I feel as if, as a society, I hope we're not going into this direction of, there are such things as alternative facts. There just aren't. There are opinions, there are facts, there are things that are absolutely true and can be proven. Then there are opinions, and there's other information that goes along with that, which is great. I think more information is not a bad thing, but we have to be critical readers, critical listeners, critical news consumers. But then again, there is such thing as a fake news, as you briefly mentioned, and it is these websites that basically were trying to look like news organizations' websites and pass themselves off as legitimate news websites, but really we're just doing it to make money, and we're making up information inside them.
Right, yeah, definitely. Now, maybe, one of the controversies in the journalism community kind of centers around what BuzzFeed did with that, Christopher Steele dossier. Now, you're an investigative journalist, and I know that you also represent SPJ, but what was your take on that? Because I feel like maybe the president and people that, defend what he's been saying kind of point to that and be like, well, this is what we're talking about. This is unverified. Things have turned out to be wrong in it, and this was still gone ahead and published. What was your take on that?
Yeah, so I think that's a really interesting situation to look at. I think there are a couple things kind of good and bad. Some things I agree with, and then some things I don't agree with. For me, leading right now, I manage an investigative unit, and I looked at that. Okay, if that was, let's say, if that similar document was about a local leader here in San Diego, if we could not confirm what was published inside it, I do not think, and I'm pretty confident to say, we would not have ran with the story in that way. I think also, though, it's hard to say, though, because, I think BuzzFeed was very transparent in how they laid out the information. So, they wrote the letter and they said, there are some things in here that we can't confirm. There are some things that we absolutely know are false, and they explained what those are. Mm-hmm. Then they said there are other things, So I felt like they were very transparent with their consumers, which is good. I think I encourage all journalists to do that. And I think on the other side, that's why with that story, if you were to tell it and maybe not have leaked or not have shown the document itself, I think were you doing a disservice to your readers and to your users and your consumers, because you weren't allowing them to look at what you were looking at. So I think ultimately it would have been something that, I probably, like I said, if I was looking at it from a local level, like if it's a local leader here, we probably would not have gone with that just because we weren't able to verify information. And there's a difference between providing just all the information that you obtain, right? So like if WikiLeaks provides information out there, but there's no verification and there's no vetting, and you're not talking to the people involved. And I think that's the difference between journalism and just people that are sharing information online, is journalists are adding that context, trying to get that context, talking to people, self-verifying, once, twice, and sometimes 3 times. So.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, and it's kind of hard to see from the outside because I've interviewed my friend Jonathan, and he's not a journalist, and we were talking about that dossier, and he was like, well, it's frustrating to be out in the public here because apparently, people in Washington, high-level journalists, not me, apparently I wasn't in that club, but a lot of journalists seem to have that dossier from months ago, and all these people were making these decisions and seeing this based on this, and the people out in the world aren't able to see that, and we're only hearing hints and whatnot of it. So it's like, are we not getting the full story when other people are? And it's like, yes, but would I have published it? Like you're saying, it would be hard to say yes because you can't confirm, so it's published. But at the same time, I think there is a frustration of people out in the world being like, well, we don't know this very valuable information that other top level people are seeing that we can't see. So
right. And I think, I also think as you said, this is something that people had before BuzzFeed had published it. So, was there this pressure that, okay, if we don't do it, someone else is going to do it, which I think is the reality that we do live in. I think as journalists and as, editors and news managers and news organizations, we have to really resist that urge to want to get everything on first and be more concerned about it being accurate and fact-checking and, could just some of it have been released and now more details have come out later. So, could the reporting have been a little bit different? And in hindsight, I wonder, how they feel about that. But in the end, I will say I was very impressed with their transparency. And I think nowadays, specifically when you're dealing with alternative facts and fake news claims, that people do want to see original documentation. So if you are publishing something like that, being transparent like that only helps.
Right, definitely. And then you kind of mentioned this a little bit, but kind of going back to the campaign season, WikiLeaks was, of course, dumping stuff on a weekly basis. Of course, you had the Guccifer 2.0 with the DNC, all this stuff. And I'm going to say I quoted from those things in columns I wrote, so I'm not above reproach on that. But, I kind of question myself, should I have maybe not reported on those things? Could those things have been doctored? I don't think WikiLeaks does any kind of verification for what they dump. They just seem like they dump it, whatever they have. So, what is your take on, because there are going to be more leaks in the future. This is just the way our world is going with technology and stuff. So, what is your general policy on reporting on leaks?
Yeah, I think you always want to verify what you're looking at. So, if it is an email that's leaked, let's just say that's sort of, very basic level, something that I would always do is, okay, one, can I put in a request to obtain this email myself? So, I'm independently obtaining it from the government or from the agency, if that's possible, if they're fall under public information laws or FOIA or anything like that. Obviously that takes time, right? And some things are time sensitive, especially, during a campaign season where things are moving so quickly and the election is happening on a certain date, right? So you can't, it can't hold off for you to verify or independently obtain this document. Something we recently did here in San Diego is someone had given us something. I put in a public information request for it, but then also decided to go to the police department with the document. They didn't dispute the document, and we went ahead with the story. So I think, that's another way, too, is to just just confront and talk to the people who are named. Is this what you said? Is this your email? And, if they're not disputing that, then to me that is enough self-verification to then continue on with your reporting, right? Because you have now verified that this is, in fact, a real document and something that wasn't doctored. And there also are ways, and it takes time, but people can, when they look at documents, or especially if it's something that you obtained electronically, that you can have different IT professionals kind of look to see if things were doctored, all of that. And I definitely recommend doing that, and I think it's something that we're going to see journalists doing more and more as these leaks continue to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, also, kind of been in the mix lately with Trump, anonymous sources. Him decrying this, and if you see anonymous sources, it's not true. I'm always very reticent to use anonymous sources. I've done it before, but it's only been in certain situations where it was absolutely called for. What is your take on using anonymous sources?
I think it's like, I would say overall, I try to stay away from them as much as possible. And I think one thing that's important that when I've spoken to the public more so than when I speak to journalists is that an anonymous source doesn't mean that the journalist doesn't know who the individual is. And this is something that was kind of a big takeaway when I've talked to the public is that, people have asked me, oh, well, they're just like quoting someone on Twitter that they don't know who it is and they've never met them and, that contacted them. And I'm like, well, no, I mean, in a newsroom, an anonymous source means that the journalist who's writing knows who that is. They're just not telling the public who that person is. So I think that's a distinction that I think as journalists we may take for granted, but the public maybe doesn't understand. This isn't just someone we don't know that sent in an email to us, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
But I think in general, I think staying away from them and trying to get people to go on the record is the best policy because I think it does, one, it allows people to hide. So if they are your anonymous source, it allows them to hide behind what they're saying, and you can't hold them accountable when you go back to them if something's incorrect or if the story changes. So they're not being held accountable for what they're saying, so they could be more likely to potentially not tell the truth. I think also it does leave for a viewer, user, a news consumer that they don't now know who is talking. So, well, anyone could maybe say that. So you do lose, I think, some of that, credibility a little bit with your users. But, I think also there, like you said, there are times where it does come into play. I would say what I've seen specifically coming out of D.C. when you look at it at a national level, I think there's an overuse of anonymous and unnamed sources, and I think we as journalists really need to push back and get people to go on the record. And I know it's easier said than done because the moment you do that is the moment you may not get a scoop the next time or you may not be able to talk to someone the next time.
Right.
But I do think we really need to push back and try to kind of stop this kind of, I would say, overuse of anonymous sources or, high-ranking officials. No, they should go on the...
Hello?
Sorry, yeah, I got disconnected.
Oh, that's okay. It was probably the NSA. But anyway, go ahead.
Maybe.
Yeah, sure. But yeah, I like what you're saying about, we should have people, go on the record and put a name to that because you're right on the news end or the news consumer end, that people want to know who's speaking, they want to have a picture in their mind of who's telling them this information, and you kind of take that away from people if you don't provide that. So that is important, I feel like. So.
Yeah.
But this has kind of brought about another controversy in journalism in general. But the idea of access journalism, I feel like, is kind of on the wane, and it seems like maybe this was always true, but it really seems like it's very true now. When these reporters are just sitting in these press conferences waiting to be fed whatever the administration's telling them, that I don't feel like that's where the stories are coming from. So I feel like that maybe that was always true, and maybe now it's just been highlighted, to a certain degree. But what's your take on how news organizations should handle the press conferences that are coming out of this administration? Because it seems like it's almost like you could just set a tape recorder in the room and walk away, and you'd have about as much useful information as sending your best journalist to this kind of thing. So
yeah, I mean, I think a couple things. One, it does allow access because if you think about, and I don't cover national as much as I've covered local and regional, but if I want to get a hold of, let's say, a mayor or, a city council member, and they're just not picking up the phone, they're not returning emails, when there is a public setting like that, so I mean, that's not completely open to the public, but in like a press briefing, that is an opportunity to maybe ask some of those questions about some other things that you might be working on or things that you need clarification on. So I think, one, it's important for the access, right? I think also why I do think it's important to still have people there is because otherwise, let's say if you did just leave that tape recorder there, just turn the camera on, you're not holding them accountable or following up with any questions if they say something that just doesn't make sense or needs clarification. But I do think that you're right that should not be, and I don't think it is either, but I also, I don't think it should be where we're getting our stories from, or it shouldn't be the tone of what maybe the conversation in the news is for that day. I think it's important to cover. I think it's an important access for journalists and for the public, because that's how the public's going to end up getting that information. But I don't think most of the stories, that's kind of going to be the starting off point, or those are just maybe the smaller, kind of easier stories to tell. You really need to dig into the policies and work on those stories more often probably than just showing up at the press briefings.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of along those same lines, there's kind of been some other controversy. This again is kind of an older controversy, but it's been brought into sharper focus lately. The White House Correspondents' Dinner. To me, that just is the epitome of this is what the public sees as being wrong with kind of this high-level chummy access journalism, and it's like you're supposed to be publishing things that people don't want you to publish. That's kind of the definition of journalism, right? And it's like you're having this chummy affair, or if it's all a joke and we're going to laugh it up, that just doesn't, it's not a good look. So to me, that's my opinion, but what is your opinion on that whole deal?
Yeah, so I will say, having never gone to one myself, and
I've never been invited. Maybe I'm just bitter. I don't know.
No. So I think that's important, though. Context. And again, I don't work in that realm of covering the president and the White House and the administrations like that. So I'm probably not the best person. But I think in general, journalists were not meant to be friends with politicians and with government officials and government employees. I mean, our job is to hold them accountable. I mean, that's one of the things. We are to go cover city council meetings. We're to go, cover a congressional hearing, and we report back the facts. And really, if, government officials do like you too much, I think as a journalist, you do question, wait, am I doing my job then? Because, if you're not asking a tough question, or if someone never gets upset with the questions that you ask, then I think it's okay. Are we digging deep enough? So I think, yes, there is some of that relationship. I think also, though, what sometimes gets forgotten is, a lot of storytelling is on developing relationships. And the reality is that you do develop relationships with these people that you're covering all the time. And I think you have to be clear with the boundaries of what those relationships are, and have very frank conversations with sources and public officials and, public information officers, spokespeople, so that that's clear and you don't get into the gray area. It should be, very black and white of, when you're acting as a journalist, when everything's on the record and when something's off the record.
Right. And kind of going along with that a little bit, I've been struggling with this myself, but what is the future of objectivity as such as it is in journalism? I mean, when you have the president saying these things about the press in general, he obviously wants it to be an adversarial relationship, like it's a war or whatever, running war or whatever he said it was. How do journalists? What would your advice be to maintain whatever objectivity they might want to keep? Because it's galling personally to hear that, and it's like, well, I'm gonna report the facts. I'm not gonna make things up. But come on, this is new. So
yeah, I think I do agree. I mean, he has said he is at war with the media and wants to continue to be. And I think as journalists, we just have to let that blow past us. Focus on the job. Focus on our job, which is to gather information, ask tough questions, publish stories so the public knows and is informed about what is going on with their money in their communities, in offices, both locally, regionally, statewide, and, at the national level. But I do think you are right, when we are humans, and I think that is sometimes also what people may not, just may forget is journalists are people. They have families. They have interests. They have all of this going on top of their day jobs, as does everyone else that, has a job. But I think, so that can be hard when you do feel as if maybe your profession is being attacked or personally attacked by someone who is in the highest office in this country. But I think because of how the job is, you have to say, you know what, he can say what he wants. We're going to continue to do our jobs. And I will say, I don't think this is anything new for journalists in general. I think it's new, the fact that it's coming from the president and the president's office. But if you talk to reporters all over the country and all over the world, this isn't the first time they've been told, that their story is not true, or that, they're being mean to a public agency, or why are they picking on this agency? I mean, especially as an investigative journalist, that's something I hear a lot. And I think some people are, they're like, oh, that doesn't upset you? And it's like, well, that kind of means I'm doing my job, because I am holding them accountable.
Yeah.
So, I don't think it's new from that standpoint, and I think that means that we are digging deep and doing what we're supposed to be doing, but it is different in the fact that it's coming from the president.
Sure, and I'm sure if I had levied these same complaints, lodged these same complaints with a journalist in Turkey or Russia or somewhere, they'd probably laugh in my face, because it's probably 20 times harder to do their job there as opposed to here. So I don't know, maybe it's just our first little taste of pushback like that we need to get used to. But you're also involved in the Freedom of Information Act Advisory Committee. What can you tell us about that group and your involvement, and kind of how should journalists use the Freedom of Information Act to further their reporting?
Yeah, so the committee, it's on its second term, so it's a 2-year term. So my term just started late last year, so we've had only a couple meetings, so I still feel like I'm still getting started with it. But the board is made up of government employees, so primarily public information officers or attorneys that deal with responses that are received under the Federal Freedom of Information Act. And then it's made up of journalists, other attorneys who are on the other side trying to get information, people who run and organize, access nonprofits, fight for government transparency. To me, I think the most important thing for people to understand is they have the same access that a journalist does when it comes to the Freedom of Information Act and state access laws. And I think that's sometimes what they don't understand. We're not using this because we're a journalist. It's actually something that's available and used by the public and is there for the public, and it's a right guaranteed, for the public to have this access to information. So, I think I encourage using it. I think especially as we look at wanting to tell, stories and being concerned about, the gray area of it being called fake news, or like someone who doesn't like the story attacking it or saying it's not true. When you can point to a document or point to a sentence or point to an email, it makes your case so much stronger. And I think then when you then publish that email and allow the public to see it, it allows them insight, and it's going to take away some of those, maybe complaints or people who are making accusations about it being fake, not true, or that you're being biased.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is amazing sometimes when you see what the FOIA results bring, what public officials are willing to put on a public email address or server or whatever. It's like, wow, we can see this, so it is pretty interesting. But what can people do who aren't journalists do to help journalists? Because I think there's a lot of concern for people that want to support our work, that they feel like this is getting undermined, and this is a real, this is a part of our Constitution that is very important. What can people who aren't journalists do to support journalists in these days?
Well, I think one is, reading, and, maybe it's buying an online subscription, or, that's sort of at a very basic level, sort of, reading these and funding, this type of good journalism that is taking place. But I think also, kind of more importantly, is, stand up for it. Because as journalists, we are providing the information, but we really need the public to stand up. If they are not okay with the president or his spokesperson or whoever it is saying things that aren't true, they need to let people know. They need to let him know. They need to let, different lawmakers know. Because at the end of the day, it's not journalists who are really going to change that. It needs to be the public that says, this is enough. We are, we want to be told the truth. We don't want to be told things that are fake. And then the other thing I will add too is just, making sure they are reading and being critical news consumers. So, look at where the information is that's being shared on Facebook. Is that an opinion article? Is it a news article? Just making sure you're aware and educating yourself and others around you about what information is being shared.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, getting near the end of my questions here, but was there anything else I didn't ask you about that you wanted me to get in there?
No, I don't think so. This is great.
Cool.
Again, sorry it took a little bit to connect.
No, that's okay.
And you said you're going to publish this on your...
This is a podcast. It comes out on Friday. I'll send you a link here. So.
Okay, perfect.
Great.
That sounds great.
Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah.
And
No
I envy you being in San Diego here in the frigid Midwest. So.
Yes, although it's not sunny today, which makes me sad. But
oh, darn.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Okay, bye.
If you enjoy this podcast, there are several ways to support it. I have a Patreon account, which can be found at www.patreon.com/Rob Burgess Show Patreon. I hope you'll consider supporting in any amount. Also, please make sure to comment, follow, like, subscribe, share, rate, and review the podcast everywhere it's available, which includes iTunes, YouTube, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play Music, Facebook, Twitter, Internet Archive, TuneIn, and RSS. It really helps. The official website for the podcast is www.therobburgessshow.com. You can find out more about me by visiting my website, www.thisburgess.com. Until next time.